But I've that's why I said I was the worst elder's wife ever, because during the years I just didn't like the rules. I just pushed against the rules.
Welcome to Hidden Struggles. In this upcoming episode, we dive into what it really meant to be an elder's wife, the silent battles they fought, and the painful realities that were rarely spoken aloud.
I don't know if you had this experience, but what I noticed was in the congregation, when brothers would have a problem with me, they would not come and talk to me about it. They would go and talk to my husband. That used to really make me upset, because I would say to him, like, why don't they, if someone thinks that I'm doing something wrong, right? Why will they talk to you? Why don't they just talk to me? I'm a person. You know what I mean? Instead of my husband coming and bringing this news to me. I thought that was very disrespectful. And again, it just pushes this idea of a patriarchy, where men are more important than women. I'm so less important that I'm not even worth talking to. That's why.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard other witness women tell me that. I mean, I didn't have that personal experience, but I do remember because JT, he did the time for the field service. And one of the things I noticed that on every one of the women's cards, our publisher records cards, so let's say your name is, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So your husband's name is Mr. John Smith, then you would be Mrs. John Smith. You not your name, not Mrs. Sally Smith, it's Mrs. John Smith because you're his wife, you're his property. That's the way they wrote those cards up. And JC and I talked about that, about how crazy it is in this religion. But you just, I mean, and we talked about that during the time that we noticed that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was looking at people's cards because they were sitting on the table. I wasn't like sitting there like, oh, let me see what they got going on. But they were sitting there, and I just happened to look at one, and I said, oh, what's my name got up there? But I wasn't really peeking at people's time. I
Yeah.
could really care less because I didn't talk about people out in the car groups like that in terms of, oh, so and so ain't going out in service and stuff, because I wasn't going out in service either. I was trying my best to not have to go out in service. And I remember when JT, as an elder, I don't know if they were giving him flack or not, but when we first got married and then he got appointed, and the night that I decided I wasn't going to the meeting and I was laying in the bed, and he comes in fully dressed, and he asked me why wasn't I getting ready to go to the meeting, and I said because I'm not going to the meeting, and he was like, yeah, you got to get up, get some clothes on, because you're going to go to the meeting. And I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm not going nowhere.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't go. And he went to the meeting by himself, right? But it was making him look bad because his wife ain't trying to go out in service. She ain't trying to go to the meetings. Because I was feeling some kind of way because people were just treating me just that bad at the Kingdom Home.
Mm.
And I remember telling his mother about him trying to get me out of bed to go to the meeting. And she told him, she said, look, she said, when it comes to going to the meetings and whether or not, she wants to go or not, she said, leave it alone. She said, if I don't want to go, she said, don't bother me. I mean, I was feeling some kind of way that night and I didn't want to go because
Right.
the hate was real. It was terrible.
It's really difficult. I remember we had some friends at the time. They were not elders yet, right? It would be like about 10 years until they would become elders. And I used to talk to them because I was an elder's wife, about how difficult some of the people were.
Mhm.
Some people would avoid you as an elder's wife because they would think that I'm going to rat them out, or that I'm going to tell their business or something. So people would avoid you. And then you had other sisters, I think, who were very inappropriate. I think they just tried to take up my husband's time in ways that I found strange. I would never call someone else's husband, even if it was an elder, and keep him on the phone for an hour and a half, about my bad day. And it just was uncomfortable. Then I had, this is silly, but there were some sisters that would always be cooking for him. You know what I'm saying?
What?
Like not full meals, but it was always like, oh, here's a cake, Brother David, and I used to get so irritated. And then once in a while I would take that cake and chuck it because I could bake better cake anyway, you know.
Oh,
But
that is crazy. I remember being at get together, and we would be, sitting there, and everybody's getting ready to wrap up and leave and everything, and then somebody would go to my husband and ask him if he wanted a piece of cake to take home. Now they ain't asking me if I want a piece of cake. They asking him if he want a piece of cake. You
Right.
know. So and so I'm thinking, and I'm overhearing the conversation. So he said, "Yeah, I'll take a piece of cake." So she brings me the saran wrap, and she says, "Here, your husband would like a piece of cake." I'm like, "You asked him if he wanted a piece of cake," and I would not take that saran wrap. And I said he can wrap his own cake, but it was almost like, "Here, you the wife, you do it." But you asked the question, so you should have went ahead and fulfilled the request. And I'm like my mama's child. I always tell it because my mom, she didn't play that. She did not play those games because
Yeah,
they didn't mess with her. They didn't mess with her.
I bet. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I mean, we could probably talk all day about the elders and all the crazy stuff that we dealt with as sisters. I mean, it was. I mean, we almost needed an elders' wives club, right?
Really, because it's a different kind of a life. It really is. People are always looking at you, you know. And my husband, he was really good about, he didn't tell me a lot of things until after we left the religion
Hmm.
about how much people would bother him about what I was doing.
Hmm.
I wasn't even aware how much, because I went back to school to get my master's degree, right, in 2011, because I had been out of work in the, in the crash 2008. I was out of work for a couple of years, and we needed money, and I wanted my kids to see that going to school is a good thing, and I wanted my kids to have opportunities. So I
Hmm.
went back to get my master's degree. In order to do that, I went back full time. I missed all the midweek meetings for like 3 years.
Oh my goodness, how did that play out? And your husband's an elder, and his wife ain't at the meeting. What did
Yeah.
the circuit overseer say?
I don't know that the circuit overseer ever said anything, but I think they gave him a very hard time. Yeah. It was great. It was so great not
Oh my
going.
goodness!
Yeah.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is crazy. How did you and your husband meet?
We met through a mutual friend, and I met my husband right right before I quit pioneering. And we were just friends for several years, and then I got married in my late 20s to him. You
Mhm.
know, and he had a very different background from me. His family is not from the United States originally. They did not grow up as witnesses. His parents learned about the religion in another country, where the culture was very different. It was more family oriented. So when they came to the United States, they came with this different idea about how to be a witness, and then they settled in the DC area, where there were a lot of other Black people from different cultures. And it was a good experience for him, that he felt like it was a decent experience. My
Mhm.
experience has been completely opposite. So we kind of have all struggled as a couple, with our views about the religion for a long time.
Oh yeah, because he's from a different country, and well, like my only experience with being a Jehovah's Witness in another country. We used to live in Puerto Rico when I was a little kid, but I was too young to really look at that dynamic.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But I just know that I've heard about other cultures. I think, isn't it like Japan, where when one person in the family becomes a witness, everybody becomes a witness. So when the Japanese were beginning to leave, they were leaving in droves. When they were joining, they joined all together, but when they left all together as well. So because it was all cultural, and I guess with your husband, if they were all family oriented, then they just had each other and they just kept the family traditions. I don't know.
Exactly. They put more emphasis on their family than on witness pseudo family.
Mhm.
So they were very lax about witness rules, because at the end of the day, their family, their cousins who are not witnesses, are extremely important to them and always have been. And they did not let Jehovah's Witness doctrine get in the middle of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I can give you I can tell you another scenario that that it's not going to be the same thing, but it could be kind of like parallel in a way. Okay, when you take a man that's a Jehovah's Witness, and I'll use my own personal experience, JT, young, up and coming brother, goes to Bethel, eventually, leaves Bethel, gets married, becomes an elder. Throughout his entire career as a Jehovah's Witness, if you want to call it career, he was always treated well. He was never, ever looked down on. He was the life of the party. He was the person that it's JT. It's him. It's not his wife. It's him. So he doesn't see what's going on with me. He doesn't see how the people are treating me because he's never had that problem. I had that problem. I lived that problem. Oh, you're a woman. When you're single, you're a woman. So I'm not inviting her because she might get the man if there's a single brother. Or she's married. I wish I was married. I'm not. She's not getting invited to this get together because we don't like the fact that she's married. So your whole life is like just seeing all the negative things. People are just accepting you because this is your husband. And he doesn't see any of that. He gets the free rides. He gets the nice treatment. And he's just riding along, smooth sailing. But you're in the bumpy ride. You don't know when you're going to be accepted in this gathering. This person's coming in. You don't know when somebody's going to say, we don't like you. And you can feel it. Now I can feel it. I could like read a room and I could feel that a person didn't like me when they came in there. So it's like, I don't need nobody to tell me that. So, like even now I'll say to him, if we're talking about like our past, and I'll say, see, you didn't have that. You didn't experience that. So you don't know what that looks like. And that, I don't know if that's the same thing that you dealt with your husband, but women, we catch it.
That is exactly this. I'm so glad you said that because I think elders' wives understand that probably more than anybody. My husband will get to the Kingdom Home. Like I said, he's pretty popular with people. He gets along well with people. He's a good listener. So as soon as he steps foot in the door, it's like the king has arrived, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody wants to talk to him. And he's having all these years of positive experiences of circuit overseers saying, oh, you should, get this privilege, and going and giving talks out where people are taking us out to lunch, but it's really for him, right? Nobody cares about me. Not that they have to, but then I felt that being an elder's wife was just so hard. Now, when he became an elder maybe about 2 years after we got married, and we already had our first child. I did not want to be married to an elder. I thought I told him that. I don't know if I said it clearly enough. Because I said when people are elders, what I noticed when I grew up was that the elders never really have time for their families. They're always too busy worried about the Kingdom Hall, and I didn't want to live like that. But that's what happened.
Totally understand. I mean, when JT became an elder, I didn't even know he was being considered to be an elder. And I'm not gonna lie. So the night that he got, that they read his name off, that he was being appointed as an elder, I'm telling you right now, I found out the same time everybody else did in the Kingdom Hall. I don't remember him giving me like a notice and saying they're gonna read me off and say I'm an elder. And I'm just sitting there like, huh? Like I was like stung, like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And it was like brand news. It was like news to me because I was like, I had no idea. But he knew that they were going to make the announcement. But I think he just wanted me to be surprised or whatever, because he likes the shock and awe value of whatever. And when they said, Brother JT is and so and so and so, because they announced 2 brothers that night that were going to be elders in the congregation. And then people were coming up to me saying, you're an elder's wife now. Or you're an elder's wife. And I'm like, I didn't even know how to even take that. I didn't even know how to take that.
What is that? Is that a job? That's not an official role. Elder's wife is not a role. Okay.
To me, it was like, I was kind of stunned and shocked because I knew growing up what it was like being in a congregation with elders. And I was always fearful of elders because I always felt like they could be the ones that could determine your fate in the congregation.
Right.
And when I thought of elder, I always thought of a person that was in charge, a person like a boss. So you working at your job, and the last person that you want to see when you're coming in late is who? Your boss, right?
Right.
So elders were like that to me. They didn't represent, people that were you could break bread with, you could, enjoy yourself in their company. They look like they reminded me of gatekeepers. That's the way I looked at elders. But like I said, when JT was his name was called that he was going to be appointed as an elder, I was sitting there in shock. I was like, oh my God, I used to think these men were gatekeepers. Now I'm going to be married to one. I was like, what's that going to look like in my life right now? How did you feel when your husband got appointed?
Oh my goodness. I was shocked too. No one told me. I would have thought that since him being an elder means the whole family has to do things differently, that they would talk about it first and get some agreement. No, we went to the Wednesday night meeting, and he pulled me outside in the middle of the meeting and was like, "Oh, they're going to name me as an elder tonight. Are you okay with that?" I was like, what was I supposed to say? No, like I can't tell you no at this point, right? So that was it. I really was mad about that. I was mad about that for a long time because I felt like this is not just a decision about you. This is a decision now that you're making for everybody, for us, and nobody asked me because, of course, that was the start of I'm not important as a woman. My opinion doesn't matter. That's how I felt as an elder's wife, you know? I was in a judicial committee meeting. Obviously, it was really a terrible experience for me. And I bring this up to talk about elders because when I got married, I really distrusted elders entirely because of this judicial process. When I went in, it was 6 men who were sitting there with me by myself. And they basically interrogated me for probably a better part of an hour.
Whoa.
The kind of I guess the kind of questions that they ask you are really very intense sexual type of questions because that's what they were thinking. I hadn't had sex with this person, but they were asking me questions that were really of a sexual nature and I was sitting there by myself. It was just very, very personal and humiliating. Something it was really like something out of a crime movie, like sitting there, with the police with the light hanging over your head. It was crazy.
Oh my goodness, like Law and Order Special Victims Unit. That's crazy.
Yes. But the funny thing is I was maybe like 25 at the time. I
Mhm.
was working a career, I was living on my own. I didn't believe in the rules of Jehovah's Witnesses. I
Mhm.
honestly thought to myself that these people should be giving me an award for being 25 years old and not having had sex, okay, and living on my own instead of giving me a hard time. That's really how I felt. But then once we had this meeting, it was just very, very humiliating. When I left that meeting, I remember thinking to myself, I am never going to let myself be in this position again where these men think that they have some kind of control over me. And I stayed pretty true to my word about that. I never trusted elders after that. Never.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it just ended up, what it ended with this judicial committee meeting was really awful at the time. But I honestly I believe that was one of the really good things in my life because after that judicial committee meeting, I just never looked at things the same. And I started to be much, much more critical of the information I was reading in the Watchtower, and I just didn't feel like I didn't feel some closeness with being a Jehovah's Witness at all anymore.
Yeah, yeah, because if you are being brought up on charges that you didn't do something,
Yeah.
then usually it's the process where it's 3 elders and now you got 6, and then you got people trying to push you into a confession that of a crime you didn't commit. I call it a crime because that's the way they treat it, like a
Like
crime.
like a crime. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that was your aha moment right there, right?
That was it. That was it. Yeah. But I've that's why I said I was the worst elder's wife ever because during the years I just didn't like the rules. I just pushed against the rules. I wanted to talk about like how difficult it is to be a mother in the religion. That really opened my eyes because I don't know if people notice it, but I felt like witnesses do not treat women and children with kindness. You know, it used to really bother me. You know, you go to the conventions, and if you've got babies, if you're breastfeeding, or, you know, you've got toddlers, you're trying to find spaces where you can walk them around. You know, sometimes brothers are harassing you, talking about sit down, you can't be out here, you can't go in the cafeteria. Where else do you want me to feed these kids? You know, and then during the conventions, they always have the mothers and the babies all the way somewhere down in the basement, you know, of a stadium. And a lot of times it's in the locker room. One year it was in the men's locker room. They had the women and the children in the men's locker room in the dark, no chairs, benches, women sitting on the floor, you know, kids running around down there. And I was so disgusted about seeing that kind of stuff year after year. Where is the love in that?
You know, I've never even heard anybody say anything like that because, you know, of course, we were going to have our kids in the new system. So we didn't have any children and we didn't have to deal with that. But oh my goodness. So you saw that. Did anybody ever complain about it or they were just being the submissive women that we're supposed to be?
I think people were just being submissive and just
Mhm.
taking it. It was only me complaining. And it took 1 year. I I went down, I took the long walk down to the basement of some coliseum or something, and I got down there with my 2 kids. I had, like, a baby here, walking another child, and I walk in there, and I see all these women sitting in the dark and hot and sweaty, and I just turned around, I walked out, and I caught the first brother that I could and, like, told him that it was a mess in there, and he went and found somebody else who I guess was in charge of it, and I laid that person out. Like, how dare you have women in these conditions? What kind of love is this? You know, what kind of loving congregation would put babies and women in these sort of conditions? Anyway, he was quite upset, but you know,
And you know, and see, these are the kind of labels they're going to put on you. Oh, look at what she is. She's not humble. She's not, you know, being a submission to the arrangement and all that kind of stuff. But then, you know, I remember doing a segment some years ago about how women were like second class citizens in the
right.
religion. And so you're looking at it firsthand. But, you know, because we are expected to not complain, this is why these other women aren't saying anything. Now, they might have been, you know, they may not have been saying it out loud, but they might have been thinking it silently. Who knows?
Right, because we're told not to complain, right?
Mhm.
This is what Jehovah provides for you. But you
Right.
remember 1 year, we had an assignment to clean or something at a convention, and in the upper levels of this, stadium, there were the boxes, you know,
Mhm.
the nice seats, and I looked in there, and there go all the circuit overseers and their wives eating buffet meals. I'm thinking, but they've got the women and the children in the basement in the dungeon.
Yeah, that was in the chairman's office. We were in there a couple of years, and I felt very uncomfortable being there. I was like saying they're gonna kick us out of here in a second because I know we ain't supposed to be up in here. That was my attitude about being there. I didn't feel comfortable at all. But you said they were eating buffet.
Yes, we're having a buffet, a catered buffet.
Oh my God! You know what they did for us? All they did was had somebody go downstairs and get the food from the that they were serving. And, they would just, you know, they we didn't have to go down there and get our own food. That's all that's what I remember seeing, is that we didn't have to go get our own food, they just bought it up there, you
Yeah,
know?
I guess so.
Okay, I wonder who paid for that,
I
you
don't
know?
know, but a lot of people saw it who were in the cleaning team and were upset, you know, because it looks like a class system, because
Yeah,
it is
the elite.
the elite.
You've just heard how the role of an elder's wife stripped women of their individuality and placed them in impossible situations where their worth was often measured only by who they were married to. But sometimes the cracks in that system lead to moments of awakening and confrontation. In our next segment, you'll hear about the final straw that pushed this sister to walk away for good. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in that next episode.